Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the music rating, ranking, and reviewing podcast we like to call Music Meltdown, in which we rate, rank, and review any artist's discography, songs, musical topics, really whatever comes to mind. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the Heartland rocker, the pop rock, classic rock titan known as Tom Petty, as well as the Heartbreakers. To their name, they have about 16 records. I don't care about studio records, so I'm not listening to She's the One. Uh, Poo me, and okay. So I have 15 records here. Didn't include Mudcrutch because that's more stuff I have to listen to. And I gotta listen to 20 Black Sabbath records next month, so I'm trying to cut things down for me. Uh, that being said, though, that's still 15 records. And going into this, I knew pretty much everything Tom Petty did up to Wildflowers. I'd kind of written off the later stuff because you never really hear it talked about. I was right to do that. But I've heard all 15 now. Most of these records are like my second listen, third listen to, perhaps. And I dig Tom Petty. I think that he is a very strong writer. I think Mike Campbell is a really underrated guitar player. I know it's probably one of those things where it's like he's been called underrated so many times he's overrated, but I mean, he really is. He's a great player. Really, the key that really brings us together with Petty's knack for pop writing and killer just hooks all across here. Obviously, don't bore us, get to the chorus. That being said, though, I enjoyed doing this, although 15 pretty much in a row was a bit much, a bit draining after a point in time. That being said, though, Patrick, how do you feel about Tom Petty going into this?
Well, I love Tom. I love Tom and the Heartbreakers. I've seen them live multiple times because they're basically while they were while they were at their peak, especially touring, they were probably one of the greatest live bands playing during their time. I've also seen Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers back up Bob Dylan, and that was a great show as well. Um, Petty is one of my favorite artists when I was a kid. In particular, grew up listening to him. I like you was familiar with everything up to Wildflowers, and it sort of lost interest. So I had not listened to his late '90s and early aughts, early to mid aughts recording output. Some of it was a surprise and decent. Some of it was not so much. So it was up and down. And I think Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers in particular have a bit of a roller coaster for a catalog. There's some great peaks. There's some lows. Not the bottom of the barrel, but not the greatest either. Um, Tom, as a songwriter, is fantastic. He's got probably some of the greatest songs of the last 50 years of the 20th century, at least, and catalog of pop and rock, and iconic. Tom's, obviously played with George Harrison, Jeff Lynne, and the Traveling Wilburys, and Dylan, and Roy Orbison. He stands right alongside them in terms of great songs in the canon of rock and roll. Um, and I'm pretty positive overall on Tom's catalog, but yeah, there's a few clunkers. So I don't think he was completely consistent throughout his recording career. But I love him, and I love him. You know, I love to have seen him live. He was just one of the best, one of the greatest bands in concert by far.
Right.
One of the best concerts
Nice.
I've ever seen too.
He also stands alongside Jeff Lynne, Steve Winwood, Eric Clapton, and Prince at the great performance of "While My Guitar Gently Weeps" at the Rock Hall not too long ago.
Correct.
Yep.
Yep.
Well, with that being said, I agree. There is definitely a range of scores for Tom Petty records, although he never dips below 2.5 for me. Gonna go ahead and kick things off. We're doing 15 and 14, then 13 through 11. Then we'll go one by one for the top 10. Number 15, though, I had a bit of a conflict, a bit of a event deciding my bottom because I think that these last two records very, very close. And it just comes down to The one at the bottom having no redeeming qualities to me, excuse me, despite not being terrible. So at 15, I have Let Me Up, I've Had Enough from, I believe, 87. And there's just not a ton to say about this album. It's his worst produced record pretty much across the entire catalog. There aren't very many noteworthy songs. It just feels like he's working off autopilot. And pretty much the nail in the coffin for this album is there aren't many memorable hooks or melodies across here, which is really the bread and butter of what makes a great Petty record. This is 2.5 stars for me. It's perfectly listenable, but I wouldn't go out of my way to listen to it. Then at 14, the record I have just above it is going to be Mojo. I think this one is just pretty boring. I'm not a huge blues fan, but judging by this record, I wouldn't think that Tom Petty was either, because 90% of the time it's just pretty boring, pretty sterile. The writing is just working off sort of generic blues templates or generic Petty. And there's some cool guitar parts by Mike Campbell across the record, but it just can't save it. The primary issue is the length. It just really drones along with these sort of basic bar blues rhythms. You occasionally get the cool guitar, like I was saying, but it's just too much of it. I do genuinely really like the trip to Pirates Cove. I think that that's a pretty good song. Whatever the hell the name of the reggae song is on here is genuinely terrible. Um, Tom Petty could do many things. Reggae is not one of them. It is bar none the worst song in his catalog. I don't even think it's close. This is another low 2.5 stars for me. It has high points, but on the whole, I just think that it's somewhat lacking. So 2.5 stars from Mojo at number 14.
Well, I have one of them, the same as you at the bottom. I've got Let Me Up, I've Had Enough. I think it's just wrote by the book, Tom Petty, but he seems to be very cynical. I think obviously he's getting frustrated with the recording industry in general, with his label, with the pressures of the business, and it's just coming out, and it doesn't seem to be focused. Um, and if you're going to try to write a timeless song like Jam and Me, you shouldn't be mentioning comedians of the day like Joe Piscopo and Eddie Murphy. It dates the song pretty badly, even though I do like the song. And I think that's actually the best song on that album. I think Runaway Trains is okay. Damage You've Done's pretty good. And it'll all work out as decent. And then it just really drops off from there. The second side is just really not even worth the time listening to, frankly. I was disappointed with this one. And I'd known it, I at least listened to it once, not long after it was initially released. Just wasn't crazy about it. And I think when Tom's angry, it doesn't seem to fuel his best stuff. When he's conflicted, when he's depressed, that's a different story. But when he's mad in particular, or turns bitterly cynical, I think it comes across in the music, and it's just not all that pleasant to listen to. And so the next one is The Last DJ. I think he gets preachy on this album. Um, it's sort of like a concept album, but there's just nothing here that really, it's loose. It's a loose concept, if anything. Um, and it's just nothing that really grabs me or that I really think is essential listening. Again, the title track, The Last DJ, is probably the best song on this album. I like Dreamville a little bit. I think it's okay. You and Me is pretty good. And then Have Level Travel's okay, but as a pop song, I think. But this album again just leaves me cold. I just don't. The message of this album is futile by this point. And what he's trying to basically get across is, you know, pre-programmed radio, you know, computer generated or automated playlists that these radio stations were sending out to all their, across the country to all their satellites. And it was essentially payola as far as Tom was concerned, and he was right. But at this point in time, even radio was on it's on its last breath, was on its dying legs. It was about to fall over completely, and streaming was about to pop up. iTunes was popping up, so the whole industry was changing at the time. And I think, he just didn't, the songwriting just doesn't connect with me on this. I think it's a bitter, cynical Tom Petty, then that just leaves me cold. So I've got those two from my last 14 and 15.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I have the last DJ up a good bit higher, mainly just because I think it has some really good songs on it, which is an issue with later period Petty, but we'll get into that. At number 13 for me, I know some people are really passionate about this record. I don't really get it. I have Southern accents. Um, it just doesn't resonate with me much. It's definitely his most 60, not 60s, his most 80s to that point, with some drum and synth sounds being really bad. I think Rebel is a great song, but I just can't stand Don't Come Around Here No More. It's by far his worst produced song up to that point, and I don't even think it's close. The title track sounds more like a Warren Zevon song to me for whatever reason. And I think Make It Better is just an amazing track, a really wonderful pop song, and one of my favorite Petty songs in general. It's the clear highlight of the album for me, but for the most part, this album feels very Petty by numbers, just with an 80s sheen to it. It's fine, I could listen to it, but in comparison to every record that came before it, and only really one that came after it, I feel like it's a pretty clear step down in quality. This is a low 3 stars for me. I think it's decent. Number 12, this is another one that I know some people really like. I wasn't very passionate about it. That's going to be the record Echo. I think this is where fatigue kind of started to kick in for me. The album, while good, once again, petty by numbers. And while it's still definitely listenable and there are some highs, I feel like, especially by this point in the career, he's definitely starting to retread ground and really could have utilized a closer studio worker or maybe an editor to really knock these later period records down in their length. This and Mojo really reek of the hour-long run times. The best songs here for me were Room at the Top, Swingin', and Echo. Past that, it's just all right, though. It's another 3 star album. And then number 11 for me, definitely the most disappointing album in the catalog for me, is going to be Highway Companion. Just not a ton for me to say about it. None of them are really amazing songs. They're all decent, they're all listenable, but without the great Jeff Lynne production, this album would be entirely forgettable and would honestly probably be on the same level as Let Me Up for me. It's fine. It's another 3 stars. I just don't get much from it. This and Let Me Up were the only albums where I just straight up didn't get a song that I thought was good enough to like. With that being said, though, these are the only Petty records that I don't like. Everything moving forward, 3.5 stars are up. I like Tom Petty a good bit, but we'll see how that plays out for me. So, 13 Southern Accents, 12 Echo, 11 Highway Companion, 3 stars.
Okay. Well, we're just trading around by one or two slots of these albums. So Mojo would be my 13. I think basically what you said about the album is correct. Again, he's just treading water here. Um, it's long. It's like 65 minutes. I think you're right. In particular, with regards to Echo and this one, although I have Echo higher than you. Not too high, but it's higher. Um, I think there's some like First Flash of Freedom. I really like that song. And I like I Should Have Known It. And Something Good Coming. But we've got, 65 minutes on this album and we've got 15 total songs, 3 of them really good. does not raise the album as a whole. Certainly, above a 3 star for me. And really, this is a 2.5 star album for me. It's just, as you said, Adrian, just too long. At number number 12 is Southern Accents. Again, it's sort of dated and of its time, I think. It was produced by Dave Stewart from Eurythmics, and I think basically the strongest song. I disagree with you though. I think the strongest song on this album is "Don't Come Around Here No More." That's a great song, um, and I can see why it was a big hit for him. Rebels, I also like on this album. I think it's really good. Um, I think that again, Petty was conflicted about the South. He was popular in the Midwest, so I can understand why a lot of people think he was a Midwest rocker. But he's from Florida, Gainesville, and he definitely Mike Campbell, Benmont Tench, all from that area. Uh, so there's strong Southern roots there. And I think Southern Accents is Petty conflicted about his Southern heritage. I think it's sort of songs like Southern Accents, right, and Dogs on the Run, sort of were his attempt at almost like a version of Leonard Skinner in a way, but he doesn't even get close to it. It's just a really it just doesn't execute properly for me. This album just doesn't quite get there. And then coming in next is Highway Companion. Again, at just 3 stars. Um, I think uh, it's good. It's got a good tempo, obviously. Lots of songs about, traveling across the US, riding down the highway. I think its title implies what it's about. And Jeff Lynne produced it. I think Tom was hoping for another Full Moon Fever. Unfortunately, I don't think the songs come close enough to get there. Um, Saving Grace, I think Tom's pretty good about picking off the lead-off tracks of his albums, and I think Saving Grace is the best song on this album. In fact, it's very good. Square One's pretty good. I like Turn This Car Around. And the closing song, The Golden Rose, I like. And then, you know, it's a pleasant listen. It doesn't bore me, but it doesn't excite me either. I think it's decent. I think it's almost good, but it's not quite there yet. But we're gonna get there shortly. So we're very close right now
Yeah,
towards the bottom of this
pretty
discography.
much. Yeah. I
Yeah,
feel like this is kind of where our lists are going to start shaking up, though. Probably
probably.
going to be some divergence here. But I just kind of wanted to stop for a moment and ask because I feel like doing this made me really question one thing. How good of a singer do you really think Tom Petty is?
Good, not
Because,
great.
yeah,
I
because
wouldn't put him in my top 100,
it's like
my
I
personal
like
top 100.
his voice, but sometimes he feels almost a little weak to me. Like it almost feels
Oh
weird
yeah,
the
he's got
music
very
without
limited
him.
range. He's got a very limited range. I think Dylan was a huge influence on his vocal style.
Yeah.
Um,
It almost surprises me that he does like this Heartland rock style because he's not really suited for it. I know that you're not really a major fan of his, but like comparing him to somebody like Springsteen, who I also think is very
mm,
limited within his range, but he just emotes so strongly and is so passionate within his songs through these sort of arrangements that I think he makes it
well,
work. I'm not sure
so
that Petty does it as
so
well.
so Petty was popular in the Heartland, but I wouldn't call Petty Heartland rock. He's more Southern rock, believe it or not.
I mean, I'd say with a
He
record like Damn the Torpedoes or Hard Promises, I mean, I think he's firmly in that style.
he he has a lot of he's got a lot of I don't like when I think of Midwestern rock, I think of like Bob Seger, Bruce Springsteen, John Mellencamp, right?
Yeah.
Um, even though
It,
Springsteen is from New Jersey, it's hard to
yeah.
he's
It's
still,
hard. It's hard to argue. He's
he's
like the
got
king of the
he's got
genre.
an album titled Nebraska. So and he was and then growing up in the Midwest, I can tell you, it was very popular.
Oh yeah.
In fact, those three guys in particular, right? Mellencamp, Seeger, and Springsteen were huge uh, during their times and during the
Yeah.
peaks of their, their careers, at least commercially wise.
Yeah.
Um, so, but I think Petty's got strong Southern roots, and I think it comes out. I don't think it's not. I would not, call it Leonard Skinner Southern rock
Mhm.
or
I
Allman. It's not Allman Brothers. It's more pop. And
I'd actually
Petty always had a Southern California influence on his music, right? The Byrds were a
absolutely.
huge influence on Petty,
Mhm.
really big.
I
So as much as there are Southern roots there, there's also a Southern California feel to Tom Petty, and that's where he moved to eventually.
absolutely. So
Go ahead,
I'd say most
Adrian.
of
Sorry.
his music. I'd say most of his music very much borders over Americana, which is interesting
Yes. Oh,
because
yes,
Americana really
definitely.
wasn't a fully fledged genre by this point, but he's almost really the progenitor for him, like an act like the Birds that are very close
Right,
to
like
country, but still
a
have
proto the band,
absolutely.
which was very, I mean, a Canadian band that was very
Oh, yeah.
Americana, surprisingly.
Well,
But yes,
yeah. With that being said, just kind of wanted to talk about that because I think it's
but yeah,
interesting.
no, I don't. Oh, it is. I don't. I think he's got I think he's a good vocalist, but I don't think he's great. I don't. I would put even his hero Dylan. I'd put
Yeah.
way above
I'd say
Petty in
he's
terms of vocals.
I'd say he's very comparable in his sort of range wise to somebody like a Randy Newman, to like a Bob Dylan, who they have
Yep.
like their
Yep.
signature style, are very limited in what they're able to do, but are just able to utilize it in such a captivating way. But with that
Very
being said,
limited range. Yep.
yeah, I say we should possibly get back to the ranking now. At
Yes.
number 10 for me, like I said, we're probably going to start diverging here. I have the self titled debut, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I think that this is a solid record, but a bit scattered stylistically. It's solid though. I think Breakdown really good. The first Tom Petty song I actually heard, surprisingly. Same with the Wild One, Forever. But on the whole, it's mainly just a decent batch of songs. The Closer American Girls, though, his first really big hit, is just an all-star song. And great melody, great chorus, just killer track. It's where they find the perfect blending of the Heartland rock sound, a bit of the Americana tinge with the pop rock writing. I think it's great. And it's easily Petty's best vocal performance across the record. Overall, though, I give this album a low 3.5 stars. It just lacks the impact that I feel his best work would. And despite the band clearly being talented, it lacks the songwriting growth and the consistency that make a great Tom Petty record. So number 10, Self-Titled, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Okay. Number 10 for me, believe it or not, would be Hypnotic Eye. I think as a but I've got it at 3.5. So I think as a way to go out as a posthumous record, which it was certainly not intended to be, like others are, um, I think it's really good. Fault Lines, I really like a lot. Red River, I think, is a very strong song. All You Can Carry, American Dream Plan B. The first side of this in particular, I think is really good. You Get Me High, I like. Burnt Out Town, Shadow People. I think, and they're longer songs too. These are like 4, 5, 6 minute songs. Um, but I think this was a good album. Um, I think Mike Campbell sounds great on this. Benmont Tench sounds great on this. Um, it's it was never intended to be. He's angry here again, but this time he seems to be focused on what he's doing and in terms of his songwriting. Um, he's efficient with his lyrics. He's he's thinking about the melodies again of these songs where I think you know in the past, he was getting lazy, low effort, 12 bar blue derivative stuff. You're right. Um, so it's a shame that this was his last album because I think he had a lot more to offer. Um, but, the last time I saw Tom Petty was a month before he died. and it was in Seattle here at Mariner Stadium, and he played a great show. Um, and he did a retrospective of his catalog, and it was all fantastic. He had some great backup singers. It was the same backup singers who were sisters. I wish I could remember their name, but they were the backup singers for Leonard Cohen and during Leonard Cohen's last tours. And just really, really, it was a fantastic show. You would not be able to tell that he was not feeling well, or that I know what was happening. His back was killing him. And it was, still, he always put on a great show. And he played a couple of tracks from this album as well, and they were both fantastic. So, yeah, I think this was a strong last album for a great artist.
Nice. We're gonna need to keep an eye on those backing singers to see who they're working with next. Seems like they're a harbinger of some kind. So, number nine for me. We're back to agreeing. Hypnotic Eye. Very close between this and the debut, but I still had this one slightly higher just due to the first half of this album, which I was really blown away by. I thought the
Mhm.
first half of
Yeah.
this record, like the first couple tracks, are straight up great.
Yeah.
I was expecting this maybe like top five from the strength of those songs because I like them a ton. American Dream, Plan B, Fault Lines, Red River, and All You Can Carry are among my favorites of his post 2000s catalog. The issue comes down to the back half. I think you mentioned liking some of these tracks, but Sins of My Youth and You Get Me High, I just don't like those songs at all.
Okay.
Sins of My Youth, especially, just like the rhyming that he's doing on there. It's like I hate to do this, but it sounds like kind of the very first thing that he thought of is what he wrote down. And it's like he's
Mhm.
taking the most obvious route every time. It's just like, come on, man, think a little bit more outside of the box. But
Mhm.
the rest of it is somewhat forgettable for me. And while nothing on here is as good as American Girl or Breakdown, the sum of the first album is it's scattered. I feel like this one is a more consistent overall project. It's still a lower 3.5 stars. It's a good album, not his best, but I especially think for a final record by one of these later rockers, I mean, it's no Black Star, but it's certainly better than fucking Funplex. It it's a solid record. I like it a good bit.
Okay. Still a 3.5, still 3.5 stars. I think Echo is very good. Well, I think it's good, bordering on very good. Let me put it that way. Again, though, I think its downfall is like you had mentioned with this album and Mojo. It's long. It's 62 minutes. It's meant to fill out a CD. Um, some editing would have helped tremendously, I think. And if he had cut probably 4 to 5 songs off this album and then kept the strongest ones on, I think this could have been bordering on very good to great. But unfortunately, there's songs like No More or About to Give Out, which I think they just are a dirge. They drag. I really like Room at the Top. I think that's a great song. He did that on the last show I saw him. Swinging is very good. Really like that song. And uh, Echo, the title track, as you mentioned, good song. Um, and Counting on You, I think, is a very good song. Um, I think, again, there's no, this is just a straight ahead Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers album. I think he's trying to recapture something that may have been lost. And I think he might be copying himself a little bit, and in particular his earlier late 70s work. Um, but I don't think it's horrible. And I think some of the songs on here in particular lift it up above just a decent album. I think at least half of the songs on here, we've got 15 songs, I think. 63 minutes is just too long. I think they could have cut 4 or 5 songs off of this, and man, it would have been fantastic. It would have been really, really good album. So as it is, I'll give Echo 3.5, but I enjoyed it. It was good.
Yep. I'd probably agree with that. Cut that down. cut it down to say the best 8 tracks on there, get the best 4 or 5 from the She's the One soundtrack, and you probably make a pretty good album out of that.
Hmm.
But anyways, number 8, this is where I have The Last DJ. So far, the biggest disagreement in our list, but we've pretty much talked about all the same records so far.
Hmm.
This is one of the trickier ones for me to rank. I think it's a pretty big step up from Echo, but in the grand scheme of things, still not top shelf heady. Starts out great though. The Last DJ, Money Becomes a King, Dreamville, all really good songs. This is a bit more of a rocking record in comparison to something else, but he's going a bit more retrospective, a bit more sort of outward thinking, you know. Joe is awful, really bad. Probably the worst song that he made up to that point. Just really no bueno. Surprised you didn't bring that one up for how low it was on your list. But Lost Children and Blue Sunday are my favorites on here. Really like those songs. I think it closes very well with Can't Stop the Sun. But there are other just kind of mediocre, all right tracks. Overall, I have this one at a higher 3.5. I could maybe see it going to 4 with some trimming. There's plenty of strong material, but there's just some material that bogs it down. And I do think it being a concept record is kind of lost. It doesn't have the connective tissue that it needs to really stick true to that, but it doesn't necessarily ruin the record. It's still good. I like it. 3.5 stars for The Last DJ.
Oh boy. Here's where we're gonna differ big time. You ready? My next one is You're Gonna Get It. I just don't think this is very good, and I think compared to the debut, to the self-titled, I think it's just a huge letdown. I think there's two very strong songs on here. I Need to Know and Listen to Her Heart, which were the singles off of this album. But man, oh man, Hurt. I don't know. I just that song. I can't. I don't know. I have trouble also with the last half of this album. Uh, I Need to Know and Listen to Her Heart start off the B side, but then No Second Thoughts and Restless and Baby's a Rock and Roller. Very yeesh. It's not cringeworthy, but it's it's below what petty songwriting should be. Um, and really, I think the debut is so much stronger than this album. I found it to be a disappointment, and I listened to it a couple more times, Adrian, for this episode, and I just could not. It just was escaping me, unfortunately. I wish I could enjoy it more, but I just don't. And I think I'm not alone on this, but I do think that some people really do like this album a lot more, and probably you too, than I do. I think the flaws are just they're just no second thoughts and Restless in particular. Big disappointment, Hurt, disappointment. You're gonna get It's Okay. The title track's all right, but two tracks on this are great. I Need to Know, Listen to Her Heart. Unfortunately, it just doesn't. That's not enough to pull it up to anything below, or it's not enough to pull it up to anything above 4. This it's a 3.5 for me.
Okay. Well, you were never going to get it, so it's okay. It is what it is. I think it's a step up, but I mean, I do think it's far less.
Obviously, yeah, you've already had the debut on your list, so yeah.
I think it's far less adventurous than the debut was. They very much
Hmm.
found their sound, and it's a prototype for what a record like Damn the Torpedoes would become.
Hmm.
Still having a bit more of bluesier influences there, but I think it's just a fun rock record. Although I'm going to talk about it pretty soon, so it's not that much higher on my list. I'm going to get back at you because I have one that I know is going to be very high on your list.
Oh, I don't even like. I don't even. I know what it's gonna be. Go ahead.
Number 7 for me is going to be Full Moon Fever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's what I have to say. It's a very strong improvement from Let Me Up. I've had enough.
Okay,
Full Moon
hold on a
Fever.
second. Hold on. I think you should. I think you should let people know how much you like Yellow and Jeff Lynne. You're a big fan, right?
Well, yeah, Yellow shits all over this.
Well, no, no, no. But Jeff Lynne produced this album, so
Yeah,
I think you
I'm
should
good.
know that
I'm
it's yeah, yeah. Go
I'm
ahead.
getting
Go
there.
ahead.
I'm getting there. Full Moon Fever brings in Jeff Lynne. You saw. the episode that Patrick and I did on ELO. We love us some Jeff. But because of that, the album sounds great. Very similar to Harrison's Cloud Nine record. But overall, I would say that this is a fair bit weaker. There is another example where this is going to happen on a lot of the albums. The big singles just kind of overshadow the album cuts. I Won't Back Down is pretty clearly the best song here, in my opinion. There are other strong ones. Love is a Long Road, You're So Bad, and the Apartment Song being some of my preferred ones. There are some missteps, though. I like Free Falling, but it's beyond overplayed. And it's one of those songs where I feel like his lack of a proper vocal range definitely weighs it down, because he's not really able to. I feel like if a stronger singer was on it, they would kind of, with how basic that chorus is, they would kind of mess with like what they're doing with their voice and maybe go a bit higher, go a bit deeper, hold out a note or something. You get what I'm saying? Maybe do like an Aerosmith Dream On, although it wouldn't be great in this scenario. You get what I'm saying? I feel like there could be more done to elevate the song. As it is, it's a bit plain. I don't like Running Down a Dream that much. And I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better is obviously a great song. It feels so out of place on this album to me because he's not really making it this big petty song. It sounds like him doing the Birds. And it's like, it's
Right.
good. I like it. But it's
Right.
just like, why is it on this 80s produced sort of pop record? It's so weird to me.
Well,
Uh,
obviously, yeah, I mean, he wanted to let his birds, he's letting his birds love show through. Go ahead.
well, he could have had like Gene Clark. I think Gene Clark was still alive at this time. He could have just had some of them doing melody.
Not only was Gene Clark alive,
Yeah,
this raked in a lot of money for Gene Clark. It
yeah.
gave him a lot of royalty money that he normally would not have had.
I mean,
So
real.
Petty was definitely showing love for Gene on that by covering that.
I feel
Sorry,
like
go
he
ahead.
probably could have gotten some of the Birds people in to like do harmony with him. Because I mean, I feel like
He has. He's had
yeah,
Roger. He has actually sang with Roger McGuinn harmony, but
okay,
on Roger McGuinn's solo album. Go
okay.
ahead. Sorry.
Because I feel like that would have elevated the cover and made it feel a bit more natural. But I mean, it is what it is. To clarify, I like this album. It's on the borderline of 3.5 and 4. As it stands, I'm at 3.5 stars. I think it's another case where it sounds great. And these are good songs. It's just there are the obvious standouts for me. So it is what it is. Number 7, Full Moon Fever. Still a good album. Sounds good.
Number 7 for me is going to be the self-titled debut, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. I think it's so I don't think you're going to get it's the worst thing in the world, obviously. And this one is a four, and the self-title is a 4-star record for me. I think it's just a little bit stronger, and it's got two fantastic songs on it. Rocking Around with You is a great opener, but Breakdown, really love that song. I think it's
Yep.
fantastic. I think I agree, American Girl, iconic. It was in, Silence of the Lambs. It's in an unforgettable scene for people who've seen that movie, which makes it, an
Right,
iconic
right, right.
song. I think The Wild One Forever is a good one. Like that track a lot. Anything that's rock and roll. I love the backup vocals on this. I love the Heartbreakers backup vocals on this album. They didn't sing like this again. They had some high oohs and ahs, but they never really were as involved with the backup singing as they are on this record for some reason. I think Fooled Again's a great song, and Mystery Man's a really good song. I just really, really like this album. This actually was the first Tom Petty I heard when I was a kid. Fell in love with it, especially Breakdown. It's just such a great, great, great track.
Yep.
Um, I give this one 4 stars. This one is a very good album. I really like it.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I like Breakdown a lot. Like I said before, that was my first Tom Petty song. I like voluntarily knew was Tom Petty. And
Right.
really strong starter. It behind American Girl, it's easily my second favorite on the record. So and both those would probably make like a top 25 Petty songs for me. So
Hmm.
number 6, I'm also in 4-star territory now. But now I'm talking about my favorite of the two being You're Gonna Get It. So I don't think this is like his best record or anything. You can calm down over that. So I
Okay,
think this
good.
is a strong step forward from the debut, however. A bit more overtly Heartland rock, a bit more country than he would get later on. The band seemed to be operating, though, as a much tighter unit, and they're a bit more unified across this. And it's just a strong crop of songs, albeit the highs are very clear to me. Magnolia, Listen to Her Heart, and Restless all being my clear favorites. I don't think it closes greatly, though. I think Baby's a Rock and Roller is just kind of okay. But past that, it's really fun. It's really enjoyable. It's 29 minutes. Just sort of lay back, kick around, have a fun time with a rock and roll record. 4 stars. It's a really just solid record across the board. You're gonna get it.
Awesome. My next one is Long After Dark. I really like this album. I think this is a 4-star album for me. I think this is Tom Petty's um, reckoning with new wave, which was huge at the time. And I think, you know what? I think the mashup between the two works pretty good. Um, Definitely, You Got Lucky is a fantastic song. It's actually a very interesting video too. I don't know if you've seen it, but it was very popular on MTV when it was initially released. Um, Finding Out, I think, is a really good song. Change of Heart, great song. Love that song. Good straight Change of Heart's a great, just straight ahead pop song. And then I think the album does start to lower in terms of song quality towards the end of it, like The Same Old You, Between Two Worlds, and A Wasted Life aren't the strongest tracks on this album, but I think up until then, even Straight into Darkness, I think really good. Even One Story Town, the opener, again, Petty knew how to choose a pretty good opener for his albums. Very good song. They're basically it's a mashup of new wave and the southern midwestern style rock that Petty was obviously at this time very popular. This was, years after Damn the Torpedoes, the album that followed even Hard Promises. So Petty had already made a name for himself, had gotten on the Billboard charts, had sold gold records, and was doing very well for himself by this time. So I wouldn't say he's following trends. I think he's incorporating new wave and interesting and intriguing uh, songwriting approaches. And I really like this album. I think it's good. Give it 4 stars.
Nice. I'm not even talking about that one yet. And I actually think he may have not gone far enough in the new wave for me. Which I
Hmm.
agree. There's definitely added synths. He's operating from less sort of heartland scenarios, but I feel like he could have gone even further with it and made it like
Hmm.
super weird, super interesting. I kind of feel the same way. I mentioned them before, like with Black Sabbath and Never Say Die and Technical Ecstasy. I think that those records are weird, but it's like I wanted them to go even further, like put those synths even harder, like add in that piano. To
Yeah.
clarify, I love those records, and they're both going to be very high on my Sabbath list. Just a fair warning.
Hmm.
Sorry, metalheads, but we'll get to that next month. We'll get to that next month. And number 5 for me is going to be Into the Great Wide Open. Hey Jeff, love you. But anyways, pretty much tied with You're Gonna Get It for me. It's the second record produced by Jeff, and it sounds way better in my opinion. I think Full Moon Fever, for what it's worth, I think it does sound a little bit dated. I like it a lot, but I think it has some pretty cheesy 80s elements to it. Some of the synth choices are a bit, yeah, but I still think that sounds good, obviously. I think that they're mostly traded out for a slicker, more kind of natural sound, more reminiscent of Lynn's solo record, Armchair Theater, I would say. And with that, there are just some incredible songs on here. Learning to Fly is one of his best songs just ever. King's Highway is great. The title track matches it in quality. Too Good to Be True is a fun little pop number, and Built to Last is one of my favorite closers that he ever did. Sadly, though, despite its length, I feel like this record kind of drags. It kind of stays a
Mm.
little bit in the middle, a bit mid tempo, and it rarely elevates beyond that. And there are some weaker moments, songs like The Dark of the Sun and Making Some Noise. Overall, though, I still do have it at 4 stars. I think it's really good, but like all of his records that he did with Jeff Lynne, I don't think that he brought his best material. Like if Jeff Lynne produced maybe the material that he had in the late 70s and early 80s, I think that they could have probably made like a 5-star masterpiece. As it stands, though, with the material that he had, though, it's still a really good 4-star album. I still like it a ton. It's not quite as great as it could have been, you know?
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting.
Okay. Um, I'll be getting to that album, but not yet. Because my next album is going to be The Waiting, or excuse me, Hard Promises. And a lot of it's due to The Waiting, the song. Love that song. That's probably his strongest opening track, excluding possibly Full Moon Fever. And I won't back down. But it's a great one. And then it just keeps going. Woman in Love, Night Watchman, Something Big in Kings Road. This is one that's a bit. This is an album that I think is a bit front loaded. But boy, the strength of these songs is pretty spectacular. Really good album, I think. Because in particular of that first side. Um, and there are some good songs I think on the next side too. The first two, Letting You Go, and The Thing About You, I really like. Insider's pretty good. I think it closes kind of weak, that Criminal Kind, and you can still change your mind. Eh, it's okay. But I think overall, this album is a much stronger Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers album. He was at war with his label at this time over what the label wanted to charge for the album. They wanted to raise the price, and Petty was not keen on that, and they got into huge contract disputes. Um, there's actually a very good documentary on Tom Petty that was directed by Peter Bogdanovich. And I think it's available. I think the whole thing might be available on YouTube. If not, you can certainly stream it for not, you can rent it for not, certainly not more than $5 or $6. And it's worth it. It's a very good documentary. It's definitely a long rock doc. I want to say it's over 3 hours, but there's a lot of live Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers in there, and his fight with the record label in particular over this album. It takes up a good section, a good chunk of that documentary. It was the context around the recording of this album, and I think it played a part in how this album was accepted. And it started the ball rolling for Tom Petty's resentment of the recording industry, right? This is where the fight started or the war started with Tom and the record label. Um, that would end up with the last DJ, right? I mean, and throughout his career, he's got a streak in him, that's pushing back against basically the hand that feeds him. But I think he's right on a lot of fronts. So really love Tom. I really love his songwriting, and I think the strong songs on this album are very strong. I still give this a 4-star, but it's a strong 4-star, almost 4.5.
Nice. Yeah, we generally have similar opinions on that record. I'll get to it a little bit later, though. Number 4 for me, it's going to be Long After Dark. I wish I could place this album higher. I think the slight addition of synth here is just really great. The Petty and the band in of themselves, they're basically just doing Hard Promises and Damn the Torpedoes again. They're adding like that little bit of new wave flair. It's just like you add a little bit of cinnamon whenever you're making your bananas Foster, so the sparks show up, and that's kind of what the synth is here. It's kind of just like for show, but it's really great. And you're like, whoa, you know. To be blunt, the first 6 songs on
Those
here,
bright shiny horn synths
oh yeah, that
that appear through this album. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
got lucky.
yeah,
Yeah. To be
yeah.
blunt, the first 6 songs on here are it's just my favorite batch of it's my favorite streak of songs on any Petty
Hmm.
record. I think
Hmm.
that those songs are all absolutely fantastic. Sadly, though, Straight into Darkness, The Same Old You, and A Waste of Life, pretty meh. Like they're fine, but it's just like I don't think that they do a ton. But I love pretty much every other song on this record, with my favorite being We Stand a Chance. I have to have it at 4 stars simply because I really love like 2/3 of the record, but there's just like that 1/3 that bogs it down, which happens on like every Petty record to me. It sucks. I feel like he never quite puts out a record that's like track for track greatness, which I know you're going to disagree with, but I mean, it is what it is.
Well, I think there's just a couple,
Yeah.
but yeah,
There's only a couple
yeah.
left to talk
I,
about, to be fair, though. So,
I don't disagree with you. I think
yeah.
that, and especially I think a lot of his albums are front loaded.
Yeah.
The first
If,
sides are fantastic, and then it starts to trail off towards, towards the end, except
absolutely.
for except for top tier Petty.
If everything was as good as that first half for me, I could see like five potential on this record because I think that there are
Hmm.
just incredible songs. But as it stands, I have to have it at 4 stars. Still just a very good album. So, Long After Dark, number four.
Okay, my number four is Into the Great Wide Open. Very good album. I would just, I mean, it's sort of like reiterating everything you said. I think um, this is not, to me, this is not the strongest Jeff Lynne album. It's close. And we're going to get to that shortly, but I think it's very good. It's funny. Ben Montench hated Jeff Lynne as a producer. Hated Lynne as a producer. He only got to play on maybe 4 to 8 bars of any one given song. Very simplistic keyboard and piano playing, which is, to Ben Montench is like, why am I even here? What am I doing? And there are several interviews with Ben Montench where he's like, I could not work with Jeff Lynne. I could not work with him. Um, and surprisingly, this album probably sees more Ben Montench than the rest of the Lynne produced stuff. In particular, the solo albums, like Full Moon Fever, right? I mean, this is the Heartbreakers still. It's credited to them, his backup band. Learning to Fly, fantastic. Another one of the strongest openers of any Petty album, absolutely. King's Highway, Into the Great Wide Open, all very good. Two Gunslingers, cute. I like it. It's not great, but a little Wild West story for the kids. Dark of the Sun's okay, and then I think All the Wrong Reasons, Too Good to Be True. I really like. You and I Will Meet Again. I think is a very good song. Built to Last and Make Some Noise are decent songs. I can't go above four on this one. It's close. It's a very strong four, and it's the top of my 4 star list. Um, so we're really, really close on these. I think closer
Oh,
than you thought we'd be.
for sure. Because number three for me, I have Damn the Torpedoes. Once again, I think this is a decent step up for Petty in the group. Clearly going into a bit more of an overt pop direction here, and it works out pretty great. I don't have a ton to say about it though. In comparison to like you're gonna get it, my review is honestly fairly similar. It's a strong, consistent batch of songs where my highs are just so blatant. On here, there's just higher highs and better production. I think Refugee, Here Comes My Girl, and Don't Do Me Like That are all amazing pop rock songs. Century Kid was probably my favorite of the more like deeper cuts, I would say. But it's just like, as much as I like the other songs, they don't touch those because they're just so immaculately created and immaculately performed. And it's hard to argue against the production on this record. It's one of the best of the entire 70s, to be blunt. Just sounds immaculate. It's just, I don't think Petty is necessarily the most consistent writer. And in terms of albums, he just can't quite put together a track for track sort of masterpiece for me. And it's a shame because he has plenty of just amazing songs. But yeah, it's another 4-star album for me. Damn the Torpedoes. Number 3.
So I'll just add, Adrian, I think I now know why that you associate like Springsteen, Midwestern with Tom Petty. And that's because, and you like this album, that's because Jimmy Iovine produced this album. That's why Jimmy Iovine was an engineer on several Springsteen albums. And this album sort of made Iovine, in particular, a go-to guy as a producer. And it made him famous as a record producer. He was boyfriends with Stevie Nicks. He hooked Stevie Nicks up with Tom Petty. So that's like your connection there, and you're right. You have good ears. In particular, Jimmy Iovine's production of Stan Lynch's drums on this are spectacular. This might be one of the best produced albums for drum sound, period. In fact, I think it helps to make this album. Both Stan Lynch's playing and the way Iovine produced them, they just come through. They're full. They fill up a lot of space. They cross the sound stage. He's got them centered properly. I mean, it's a great production. Sorry, just thought I'd add that. Jimmy Iovine was partnered with Dr. Dre and Beats headphones, and Apple bought that company. I don't know. That's basically is part of also Iovine's claim to fame. Or number 3, you're right. Number 3, Full Moon Fever. Yes, we differ on this one greatly. This is I think the best of the Jeff Lynne produced albums. I think I give it a 4.5 star. I don't give it a 5 star. I don't think it's perfect. I think if there's a weak track on this album, it's the last one, Zombie Zoo. It's a bit judgmental. I don't know. I think he's observing like his daughter's, is basically his daughter's fads and the way she hung out with her friends in Southern LA at the time. And in the video, I think it shows through, and I think it's a bit patronizing, a bit. I think he's forgotten what it's like to rebel as a teenager. Papa Papa Tom. But otherwise, Free Fallen is just spectacular. I won't back down. Spectacular. It's got, you've got Ringo, you've got George Harrison. Um, it's so good. It's just they're both great rockers and or pop and both. Um, and I'm not going to ding either album or either song because they've been overplayed, but I do agree with you. They have been overplayed tremendously. And some of his most overplayed songs are off this album. Love is a Long Road, though, fantastic. Facing the Crowd's good as a ballad type song, I think. Running Down a Dream, that's the highway companion song right there. That song is made for driving. Running Down a Dream, something you put on the radio and try to keep your foot off the floor. Just a fantastic driving song. Great video too. This was Tom's MTV peak, as well as a commercial peak for him. Feel a Whole Lot Better. I really like his cover. I don't think it's bad. Um, and Gene Clark was at a low point in his life, and it really helped him out tremendously.
Yep. To,
Um,
to be
and I
fair, I don't
think
think.
Gene felt gratitude towards it for sure. And Tom gets to, show off his love of the Byrds to a generation, trust me, that had left them.
Yep.
I know in the music communities we're a part of, Adrian, that
Yeah.
the Byrds are popular and they should be. It's well deserved, but trust me, the
Yeah.
Byrds were forgotten by the time that Petty covered this song, and I'm sure a lot of people thought this was a Petty song.
Yeah. To
When it
be
was
fair,
released.
I don't think it's a bad cover. I think it's a good cover. It's a good song. I
Hmm.
just don't think that it fits on the record. I think that it messes with the flow because
Okay.
it's so blatantly not a Tom Petty song.
Yeah,
Because it
it's
has that 60s groove. It has that sort of sort of folk rock style to it that
It's
to
very
me it
loyal to
doesn't
the
bring.
original. Yeah, I
Absolutely.
would agree.
So it's like
Yep.
I think what might have been better is because I feel like he probably had the connections. He probably could have gotten around with like Chris Hillman, with Gene Clark, Jim McGuinn, and maybe made like a tribute EP of sorts. I think that could have
Hmm.
been really cool. And that's kind of where I would have preferred that to happen, but I get it. You just want to have some fun in the
I
studio.
think he did. I know he sang backup with McGuinn on McGuinn's solo album.
Yeah. And
McGuinn solo album wasn't long after Tom Petty released this album,
yeah.
surprisingly. And Petty may have actually written a song for McGuinn as well. I'd have to go check. It's
Yeah.
operating from long-term memory there, but
Yeah.
so
I mean,
it's
hey,
questionable.
this is all fan fiction at this point, basically. So,
No, it's not fiction.
oh,
I'm
what I'm
trying to
saying,
be. Oh, okay. Well,
I get
yeah,
you. Though. I get you
the hypotheticals and the what ifs,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, no,
for sure.
he'd be perfect, right, with those birds backing vocals, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Chris Hellman even in there, that would be fantastic.
Sure.
Um, I think the second side of Full Moon Fever is not quite as strong, but still very, very good songs on this. You're So Bad, Depending on You. Apartment Song, I think, was written after his sister's experience, surprisingly. Uh, All Right for Now is okay. That may be one of the weaker tracks along with Zombie Zoo, but I do really like A Mind with a Heart of Its Own, and I understand your your position on Love is a Long Road and those horn synths, giving it a bit of a dated sound, but I still really love that song. I think it's great. And I think it sounds great. I'm just a sucker for that stuff anyway. I mean, that's my teenage years, so you know, nostalgia. It
Like
skews
for sure.
my this is big nostalgia stuff in particular for Tom Petty, so with Tom Petty in particular. So yeah. But no, I love this album. 4.5. I think
Nice.
Zombie Zoo sort of drag it down. All right for now. Sort of, a bit rote, but otherwise,
Yeah,
every other song I think is great on this album.
nice. Yeah, I mean, I wish I had the love for it. It's got my boy on it. It's got Jeff. I mean, I love it.
Well,
So
exactly.
yeah, I don't know. Now here's what I want to say. I think my entire top three, they're all very close. I really enjoy all of them. It's it was tough ordering them, but I feel pretty content with everything. At number two for me is going to be Wildflowers. This one's very close between both the record I have above and below it. I just think that this one has overall better songs than Damn the Torpedoes. I know that that's arguable, but I think you know what I mean. But I don't think it has quite as good of an album feel as my number one. Um, for once in the entirety of music, I don't think going with a Rick Rubin is a terrible call on production. He generally goes for a more stripped back, sort of warmer approach, and I think it works very well. It opens brilliantly with Wildflowers, You'll Know How It Feels, and It's Good to Be King. They're all among my favorite Tom Petty songs. I really think Honeybee starts out way too loud. That's the main issue. The rockers on here sound like shit a lot of the time. Like the guitars are just way too loud. They're way too abrasive for like Tom Petty, which maybe I'm just a bitch, but like you get what I'm saying. You get what I'm saying.
Hmm.
I
Okay.
can't.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can say what you want about me. It's all good.
No, I mean, they're up front. I don't disagree that they're not up front. They're up front. Are they too loud? Like, is there clipping?
I doubt that there's
Uh,
clipping, but it's just like it doesn't fit for Tom Petty. I feel like he just naturally
so
works with that warmer, more stripped back style, and especially where it
right.
comes in on this record is the main issue. Where it's just like you have these softer, more gentle acoustic numbers. Then you just have this massive upfront, just heavily, almost like just this heavy electric, just like right in your face.
Like you don't know how it feels, for instance, or Cabin Down Below is another
Yeah.
one, right? Yeah.
Cabin Down Below is the big one for me.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyways, I can't deny the perfection that is the sound of Damn the Torpedoes. But at the same time, you can tell the singles on that record. I just think that the overall quality on this is a bit more balanced, which leads to an overall more fulfilling listening experience. The only ones that I really dislike being Cabin Down Below, and I marked down that there could have been some trimming. I don't even necessarily think that that's the case. While you feel the length on this record, I feel like it much better utilizes it when compared to Echo or Mojo. I do think get this down to 40 minutes and it could be his best, but as it stands, it still runs very well for its like 53-minute runtime.
Mhm.
I have it at a pretty strong 4 stars. I think it's a very strong record, Wildflowers, just with some minor tweaks, I would think. So,
Okay.
number two.
So you had Damn the Torpedoes and Wildflowers at 4 stars. Is that right? Just four?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. 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 So my number two is going to be Damn the Torpedoes. Um, to me, it's a 5 star album. I think the weakest tracks, which I still think are good on this album, are like Century City. What are you trying to do to my life? But or what are you trying to do in my life? Excuse me. But I think those are the weakest, but I still think they're good. And I think everything else is fantastic. Refugee, I think that might be my favorite Tom Petty song. It's a fantastic song. The way the tom rolls across the speakers from left to right. I mean, you're right. Very good ear, Adrian. The production on this album is spectacular. Jimmy Iovine did a fantastic job on this. Um, Everything is balanced perfectly, and the studio room itself is an instrument, and you can hear it. Surprisingly, for as clean as the production is, for as polished as it is, it still sounds live, and that just that combined with the strength of the songs on this album just make this a killer album. This is peak Petty. This is Tom at his best, and it's the Heartbreakers at their best. Mike Campbell's guitar playing on Even the Losers is just so good. Here Comes My Girl, fantastic song. Um, Don't Do Me Like That. This album is so full. It's just chock full of singles. Really, really good songs that could almost all of them be singles. You Tell Me is great. And then the closer, Louisiana Rain, fantastic. And that's where Tom's showing his southern side, I think. It's a southern gothic type of song. And this album is only 35 minutes. And it just happens to be a perfect runtime. It does not linger too long. Everything is efficient in its sequencing and the way it's put together and its intentions. Um, Everything is hummable. Every song has a fantastic melody. I just think this is peak Tom. Except there's one other album that I think is also peak Tom. But this gets into five. This is rarefied air up here. This gets to 5 stars for me.
Nice. I'm surprised that that's only number two. I figured that was a slam dunk number one. Figured you would save me, but I mean, hey, 5 stars. That works good enough for me. Sorry, Tom. Sorry, Tom. Anyways, number one for me, it's gonna be Hard Promises. Um, Perhaps a bit contentious putting this above Wildflowers or above Damn the Torpedoes. Hell, even maybe Long After Dark to a certain degree. But as I listened to it again, I've heard this one 3 times now. I went back to it again after my first listen through. I do generally think that this is their strongest effort. To me, it's where everything comes together. The band kept getting better. I think these are Petty's best vocal performances, and song for song, it's the one where there aren't obvious standouts for the better or worse, and it just flows the best for me as an album listen. If I had to pick my favorites here, The Waiting, of course, as you mentioned, Kings Row is really good. I thought Out Insider was great. I don't love Something Big. That's probably the main reason why this one is still at 4 stars for me. Another very good album. Doesn't quite have a great record for me, Tom Petty. But I mean, hey,
So nothing got to 4.5.
no. I mean, I have 6 4 stars. I think that makes up for it. Plenty of very good material. He has
Okay.
roughly 6 8 out of 10s for him, so he's still a very well regarded artist. It's just he doesn't quite have anything that I would consider truly great for what it's worth. I can poke some holes into each of his
Hmm.
records,
Yep.
which that's not an issue. I mean, it just goes to show, I mean, how I view it. And I mean, I have my opinions fairly well stated on these records, and that's cool. And I'm
No,
fine
no,
with
no.
that.
No. I'm asking. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. To be fair, this album is kind of Damn the Torpedoes too. I'm not going to deny that he's kind of trying to recreate the form of glory that was that record, and mostly succeeding, in my opinion, kind of overselling it. Um, like I've been saying though, my entire top three, it's very close. This one just ends up taking it for me. I don't know. I think it's kind of akin to You're Gonna Get It. It's a very strong rock record. It's got some of the really great single qualities that are on something like Damn the Torpedoes. It's incredibly well produced, like Into the Great Wide Open. And it's maybe not as overplayed and overblown to me like a record like Wildflowers. It has everything that I want in a Tom Petty record, except for it being great. So, 4 stars. Really good record, Hard Promises. I like it a lot.
Okay. Well, I gave it 4 stars too. So we're both it's in terms of star rating and right at
We
at the
agree on
same
it.
tier. Exactly. So of course my number one is going to be Wildflowers. It's Petty's most personal album. Uh, he was getting a divorce at this time. His wife was suffering from mental illness, and he was also under the throes of heroin addiction at the same time. This was a rocky point in his life. I don't know. His house was his house burned down from an arsonist. He really had some struggles. Again, that documentary is well worth watching on Petty's life. I wish I could remember the name of it, but look it up. Peter Bogdanovich, Tom Petty documentary. You'll find it. You'll Google it. Um, to me, I don't think there is a weak track on this album. And it runs, at 62 minutes. You're right. It's a long one, but it doesn't let up. Wildflowers, perfect way to start. Again, um, which is a love song to his wife, even though they're getting a divorce, right? You belong somewhere you can be free, basically. You belong somewhere out, away from me. Um, it's uh, it's an amazing song. I think every track is heartfelt in here. This is Tom at his rawest, obviously. And his man. The first 7 songs on this are almost all 5 star songs. Wildflowers, You Don't Know How It Feels. That's one of the tracks I think where the guitars are pretty front forward. Although I don't think, I don't think I don't know. I don't think they're toned up that much. They're turned up that much in terms of decibel or volume. I don't think it's clipping, and you don't either, I know. Um, and I love Steve Ferrone's drumming on this album. Stan Lynch had left, and Steve Ferrone took over, and my God, that Steve Ferrone's kick drums on this song, You Don't Know How It Feels, as they just, man, they just every beat just really resonates. Great drumming. Love the song. It's definitely a fu to his wife after after Wildflowers is a love song to her. You don't know how it feels is a forget you, and it's over. It's the ultimate breakup song. Time to move on again, right? There's a story behind this album. There's context behind this album. These songs actually are following along a very personal narrative arc with Tom's life. You Wreck Me, It's Good to Be King. Wow, every one of those songs are so good. Concert staples for Tom. Um, Only a Broken Heart is it's a good transition, I think, into Honeybee, which is fantastic. Don't Cabin Down Below, one of my favorites. Higher Place, House in the Woods, really good. Crawling Back to You, really good. Ah, this is a great album. To me, this is Tom's perfect album, along with, it doesn't have to be quite perfect for me to get to 5 stars. So Damn the Torpedoes has got some tracks that I think, I could probably do without, but I think are still good and worth listening to. Here, every song for me is fantastic. But yeah, both 5 star, but I think that's what separates Wildflowers from Damn the Torpedoes is the songwriting, and that's what makes this album a number one for me. It's Tom's most personal, it's his blood on the track.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could agree. I think that it's very strong, and and everything that you said makes perfect sense. It's just,
And I agree with you, Adrian, that Rick
yeah,
Rubin doesn't get in the way of
yeah.
production on this album. Very
One,
straightforward,
one
very,
of like
very effectively produced.
one of like
Everything sounds
three
great.
one of like three times in his career that he did that on a non-hip hop record. So good,
Yeah,
good for Rick.
yeah, yeah.
Rick.
No, I agree with you. He does not get in the way in production on this album.
Yeah,
Sounds really good. And then Tom wanted this to be a double album,
I think I've
even
seen
though
that actually.
I've got it. So they released it a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
The tracks that he wanted to be, and Walls was going to be one of them, believe it or not.
I was gonna say, didn't a lot
It,
of those tracks end up going on to the "She's the One" soundtrack?
that's correct. That's correct. And so they brought those versions that he was working on for this album over on that extended edition or special edition or whatever it was, but they're very good.
Nice.
As a double album, as Tom really wanted it, I think maybe the label might have been right in staring him down off a ledge. I think it would have been a little too long, dragged on
Yep.
too long. And I think keeping it at 62 minutes and keeping it with the strongest songs out of the complete set was a
Yep.
wise move. Um, but yeah, no. So yeah, I love Petty. I'm not a completist. I don't, think everything he did was great, but a lot of it was good to very good, and some of it was fantastic, was great, was a peak.
It's gonna be interesting because I have a couple of things to say real quick. Firstly, I feel like how you feel about Petty, where you really like one half of the discography, like have think of there's some really great stuff. It's kind of iffy on the later period. I feel like it's going to be interesting to see that because I know you aren't doing it anymore, but a lot of people say that for a group like Pretenders, where I really like the creative Pretender stuff, which maybe that could be part of why I was kind of let down by Petty stuff because I kind of heard it was not so good, but I'd enjoyed a different catalog that had that same issue, so I kind of
Hmm.
they got my hopes up a bit too much for this. So I don't know.
Huh. Yeah, two different artists.
Oh, very different.
And the Petty's, Damn the Torpedoes. What we're talking, Petty's first three albums were in the 70s, I think.
Yeah.
And the
I,
80s
yep,
weren't
that's correct.
necessary. The 80s weren't
Yep, for sure.
necessarily kind to the 70s artists.
Really
Tom
depends.
survived extremely well.
Yeah.
He did
I
very
mean,
well. And Wildflowers didn't
70s
come out until the 90s. So,
70s was
I
also weirdly kind of I mean the 80s was weirdly
and your
kind of
favorite Hard
dark.
Promises was what, 82, 83, something like that, I think.
80.
80.
Long after
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Long After Dark was
Yeah, yeah,
82.
yeah. That's right. That's right. His
Actually,
New Wave album, yeah.
Her Promises may have been 81.
Okay. That makes sense.
Regardless,
Early
very,
80s.
very that was a quick turnaround for those three records, regardless. So
And I would say some of the commonality with the Pretenders would be their debut album came out very late 79, really 1980.
yeah.
Um, and they took new wave and just brought it into their sound, where Petty sort of dabbled with it for one album and then left it
Yeah.
alone after that, I think.
Well,
But
yeah.
yeah, I think you know, I don't know. Oh, we're two different people. We're gonna have different reactions. I don't think, while you only go up to 4 stars, I don't think certainly your list is, uh, we were very close on our rankings. And I think our enjoyment level's a little bit different, but not great. Um,
I
I
think
don't,
what puts I know
Tom,
what puts
Tom's
him.
he's an
Sorry.
icon. He's a great artist. Sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
for sure. I think what puts him ahead for me, because I've had other artists that I've done where it's like they top out at 4 stars, and I feel perhaps maybe a little bit underwhelmed with the catalog because of that.
Hmm.
A good example of that would have been, where actually I topped out at 4.5 was a group like Spoon, where they have 10 records, and I quite like Spoon, but I never really loved them despite giving them like several 4.5s and thinking that they do have great records.
Hmm.
But I would say that's kind of a comparable level because I don't think that I like a single Spoon song to the degree that I like maybe my top 30 Tom Petty songs. Because that's
Right.
the difference is the pedigree in writing. Because Tom Petty is just such a good writer whenever he's on.
Oh,
Such a
yes. Yep.
great
He's a
talent,
great songwriter. Yeah, I agree. But
which,
but we're ranking albums, and so you have
yeah,
to just judge it based on the collection of songs that they intended to put on a single release, right?
absolutely.
And if you start looking at it from a song perspective versus an album perspective, it's like, well, then Petty's stature really starts to grow, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So I don't think you should feel conflicted or bad about not getting above 4 stars for a particular artist. And I wouldn't be
Absolutely.
surprised if there are a couple of albums that you might revisit later on where it grows to 4.5. It's just a number. It just
Yeah.
gives you it's there to give you a path, to give you a North Star to say, well, I really like this 7 out of 12, or I liked 8 out of the 14 songs here. And,
Yeah.
to me, it's just a trail marker to say, maybe I should go re-listen. Really, it has to, if it's 4 or
Use-
above, to me, it's worth a re-listen or a revisit, right? It's like,
Absolutely. I
not
agree.
only did it catch my ear enough, but it was compelling enough, I think. And as a whole, as an album as a whole, even the songs I didn't find as strong as others, uh, I was still willing to listen through to
Yeah.
the complete collection of what the artist
Absolutely.
intended.
I I'd agree with
You're a
what you're
human
saying.
being. You can't love everything.
Absolutely. Even some 3.5s, I think, have like some merit. For example, I'm just looking at this list of the artists that I've covered so far. A group like the Yardbirds, I topped at 3.5, but I've gone back to records like Roger the Engineer and Having a Rave Up,
Hmm.
and I do enjoy those when they're on. I just don't think that they're
Yeah.
anything crazily great or anything. I just think that they're good albums. And there's nothing wrong with just enjoying a good album, enjoying a really good album.
No.
You don't need to get to 5 stars for it to matter. So I'm sorry whenever I get upset with people for not getting up to 5 stars for the groups I love. That being said, though, that was our discussion. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Talked about Jeff Lynne for most of it, which kind of how I do
Nah, we
things.
talked about Lynn for a quarter of it. That's about it.
I mean, hey, that's not enough. That being said, I really hope you enjoy everything. Hope that you stick around for other episodes. Got some cool stuff coming up. You have a great.